Hello, welcome to World Building for Concept Artists and Illustrators. This is the intro video to start off the class. In this I'm going to just briefly talk about myself and then talk about what I think what world building is, how we're going to approach this class and approach the assignments. I'm going to talk to you a bit about my philosophy about world building and how you apply that philosophy to what you'll be doing in the class. We'll talk a little bit about the history of world building, and then I'll end it up with some suggested reading. They're not required books, but just some books that might be helpful either to read while you're taking the class or perhaps afterwards. So anyways, just a brief introduction to myself. I'm Sean Andrew Murray. I'm your instructor. I will be doing all the video lectures and the guest artist interviews, and I will be doing the one-on-one critiques. So I'm a freelance illustrator and concept artist. I have worked in the game industry as a concept artist now for over 12 to 13 years. Started off as a graphic designer, got into doing web games. This is all after I graduated from Syracuse University with an illustration degree. While I was doing some graphic design work, I was also doing some freelance illustration for a couple of tabletop RPG game companies. I would go to gaming conventions and comic book conventions and show my portfolio. So I got a little bit of work doing that kind of work, that kind of stuff. I moved to New York City and I took a job as a designer, a game designer, and a game illustrator for a company called Funny Garbage. At the time, our major client was Cartoon Network. We did a lot of web games for the Cartoon Network website. And that's where I really kind of caught the concept art bug. I knew I always kind of liked the idea of concept art, but I wasn't really sure how I was going to get into that industry, since I thought most of that work was done out in California for the film industry, but I hadn't really thought about the game industry. And and it was still, the game industry was still sort of on its way up at that time. Anyways, this is around when I graduated from college was 1998. So I was in New York in around 2000, and games were starting to get more and more sophisticated. But the kind of games we were doing for web were mostly mostly advertising for other sort of content, and it wasn't really the entertainment industry in the sense that we were selling games as products themselves. But a couple projects that I got to work on while I was at Funny Garbage kind of gave me a little bit of a peek into that realm. There were these sort of large-scale games that were created for Toonami, so afterwards, after I was laid off from that job, I took a few more web game types of jobs and some freelance illustration. But then I eventually pursued a job in the AAA gaming world, and I landed my first job at a company called Turbine. And at the time, they were working on Middle-earth Online, which eventually became Lord of the Rings Online. And so I got to do some concept art work for that, and then I was moved over to a game called Dungeons and Dragons Online, which was actually a lot of fun because we were setting the game in a new realm for the D&D universe, and that was a lot of fun because we got to define a lot of this world. We got to sort of invent it. You'll see in the first video video lecture about maps. You'll see you'll see some examples of some of the work I did. Inventing the city of Stormreach, which was the main location for Dungeons & Dragons Online. So I worked there for a while and eventually moved to down in Maryland and to work for a company called Big Huge Games, which at the time was working on a brand new IP. It was a fantasy RPG in a completely new, invented fantasy world. And I was basically working with our lead designers on inventing this world from the ground up, and it was a lot of fun. It was a really amazing project. But as is the case a lot with the game industry, there were just some unpredictable elements. Our studio almost got shut down after we were bought out by THQ. But then we were saved by another company called 38 Studios, which was doing their own fantasy MMO. They wanted us to continue to make a fantasy RPG, but they wanted us to change the content to fit the world that they had created for their MMO, and that became a game called Kingdoms of Amalur: Reckoning, which released in February of 2012. And it was a very fun project, and you know it was. So in the course of creating Kingdoms of Amalur: Reckoning, it's like I went through two rounds of world building and creating these fantasy worlds. But then 38 Studios sort of epically crashed to the ground before they were able to release their MMO. Maybe some of you read some of the stories about 38 Studios. So I then moved on to a company called Harmonix, they're famous for Guitar Hero, Rock Band, and Dance Central. And those the projects I worked on there are still unreleased and unannounced, so I can't really talk about them. But they're fun projects that I got to work on there. Before I went to Harmonix, I did a Kickstarter in May of 2012, and the Kickstarter was basically for a book that I was going to illustrate, that I'm illustrating and writing, called Gateway: The Book of Wizards. And this was all born out of the desire to create my own fantasy world that had been brewing in my head for many, many years. Well over 15 years, but that I had never found a way to introduce to the world. So when Kickstarter came around, I started thinking about, that would be neat, to do my own Kickstarter, but I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. And so I had several ideas for projects, and eventually it just came down to choosing one. And one of the ideas was a book project, and that I had sort of put a book dummy together based on some pieces I had already done, sort of personal illustration pieces, and then also sketches from my sketchbook. The germination of this idea was basically the realization that most of the work that I did for myself, as personal illustration or sketches, and in my sketchbook, they all were in this world that I was creating in my head. And even though I had attempted several times to write something about Gateway, to write either a history of it, or a story, or a novel, or a movie script based off of it, all of those types of projects generally I would peter out. But what I was always doing consistently was building this world in my sketchbooks and in my personal illustration pieces. So it was that realization that really inspired me to do the Kickstarter, and then the Kickstarter went really well. I had requested, I was looking for $10,000 to self-publish the book, and I ended up with $25,000. So that's what launched the production of this book, and I'm still working on the book. It's still in production. It's been taking longer than I had expected, mainly because of a lot of changes in my life. We moved twice since the Kickstarter was done, and also just out of the desire to really make sure that I'm doing it right, and then putting the right amount of time and energy into the book and not rushing it out the door. So, the hope is to still have it done this year. But part of what I'm doing with doing this online seminar is to share with you some of my experiences in creating this world of mine, which on some levels has been very successful, but is also on many levels is still ongoing and is still untested. And so I think together we can sort of share our own experiences in this course, and I'll share my experiences with my project, and hopefully we can sort of learn together. Okay, so now I'm freelance. I left harmonics. I'm completely freelance now. So I'm dividing my time between working on the book and working for clients on several different indie projects. So it's a lot of fun. The world of indie games right now is actually very exciting. So world building. Let's talk about world building. It's specifically visual world building. So much of art and in art history is about the artist looking at the world around him or her, or their experiences in life, and then reporting on the world around them. World building is similar, but it's observing the world around the artist and then inventing a new one and reporting on that. Or imagining a new world through a dreamlike state, or some other influences, and then reporting on that world. Let's say, for instance, a lot of art history is depictions of scenes from the Bible or from other religious or mythological texts. Certainly there are a lot of examples throughout our history of depiction of the realms of the gods, houses of the gods. So this is in a way this is world building, because the artists may be reporting on something that they believe exists, but they're not reporting on something that they see necessarily with their eyes in front of them. So there is invention there of one form or another. And then just thinking about other areas of our art history, classic artists like Da Vinci, who I think was a concept artist, because this is a guy who essentially was inventing flying machines and weapons of war and grand architectural works. I saw a show of his sketchbooks many years ago at the Met, and it just struck me that he was a concept artist. He was imagining all these amazing things. That's a good example. Hieronymus Bosch's paintings, which are mostly biblical in nature, allegories, but in a way he sort of created these visions of the Bible that were very unique and were his own personal vision. The Bruegels as well have sort of very fantastical imagery in their work. And then we can look at even a little more recently at artists like William Blake or John Martin. John Martin, who painted these amazing grand apocalyptic landscapes that were, again, usually biblical in theme, but like, for instance, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, Joshua commanding the sun, the seventh plague of Egypt. These were just visions of another world. They were otherworldly. They're really amazing paintings. William Blake, all of these artists also, they were depicting biblical scenes, but they were sort of doing their personal take on scenes from the Bible or from Paradise Lost. Doré, Blake, and Martin all illustrated Paradise Lost. Another interesting example is Henri Rousseau, who he's sort of famous for his paintings of these sort of jungle scenes, these sort of fantastical jungle scenes, but he never traveled to any jungle in his life. I think he lived all his life in Europe. So in a way, there's sort of these personal, fantastical visions that he had of these jungle scenes. So you could sort of consider that to be world building. Another area that's kind of interesting to think about the early history of is film. In the world of film, we have very early on we have George Méliès with his early black and white silent films like Trip to the Moon, which depicted a trip to the moon, right? And no one had been to the moon at that point, so it was inventing a world. Douglas Fairbanks's Thief of Baghdad, again another silent film. It's based on the 1001 Arabian Nights, which takes place in historical Middle East, but a fantastical mythological depiction of that region. So let's see. Another good example is Fritz Lang's Die Nibelungen, which is based off of the German folklore saga, the Nibelungen saga, which is about Siegfried the Dragon Slayer and his travels to the land of Burgundy. And he encounters lots of different characters and creatures and travels through all these different fantastical landscapes. That's a really interesting film visually. You really should check it out. I mean, Thief of Baghdad and Fritz Lang's Die Nibelungen. You have to see them. There's also Frank Capra's Lost Horizon, which is about a journey to Shangri-La, which is a Himalayan fantasy kingdom. And then, of course, there's, you can't forget about The Wizard of Oz, Victor Fleming, 1939, depicting the land of Oz, which is, a very classic fantasy world. Roald Dahl. It's part of our popular culture at this point, especially because of things like the Victor Fleming's movie. Another good example is King Kong, which there have been many versions made, but the story of King Kong is that he's a creature that's found in this lost world, and that's sort of born out of this of a tradition of sort of a lost world subgenre, which started in sort of Victorian era literature. So the lost world, the idea of sort of these lost worlds, kind of came out of was a response of to the discovery of all these sort of archaeological sites, ancient civilizations like Egypt's Valley of the Kings, the city of Troy, ancient Mayan ruins. This sort of inspired this movement in literature to create these worlds that were kind of based in mythology and also based in real world archaeology. They depicted these mythical kingdoms like El Dorado or Atlantis. So in literature, so that was film, right? We talk a little bit about how this tradition started in literature. You have to go back and look at books like King Solomon's Mines, The Lost World by Arthur Conan Doyle, Edgar Rice's Burroughs, The Land That Time Forgot. Erewhon by Samuel Butler, which was actually it was based off of his own experiences living in New Zealand, but he sort of created this world that doesn't exist. Actually, the word Erewhon is the word nowhere backwards, although the W and the H are switched. Jules Verne's Journey to the Center of the Earth. Even H.G. Wells's Time Machine, that sort of depicted a future Earth. That was definitely world building. And of course, Lovecraft, H.P. Lovecraft, with his Mountains of Madness. But he also invented sort of his own version of New England. And sort of a lesser known thing about Lovecraft is that he had this whole world that were part of the Dream Cycle books called the Dreamlands, which was this sort of alternate dimension that you could reach through dreams. So all of these examples of literature that where fantasy worlds were being created, whether it was sort of the lost world genre or just these completely new fantasy universes and worlds that authors were creating, those things inspired artists, and so that's what sort of led into sort of the modern popular culture examples of fantasy world building. And of course I haven't mentioned Tolkien, but obviously J.R.R. Tolkien and even the stuff that his contemporaries were doing, like Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis. These were also hugely influential on artists as well. The point I'm trying to make is that it's not a new thing, right? It's not just in the last 40 or 50 years that the idea of world building and imaginary worlds and building and creating imaginary worlds was invented. Tolkien wasn't the first to do it in literature, and artists, modern fantasy artists weren't the first to depict fantasy worlds. So it's a tradition that goes way back. So let's talk a little bit about how I am going to approach this class and sort of the philosophies that I want you guys to apply to the work that you do in this class. We're going to be talking a lot about what are the elements that create a compelling fantasy world. What is it that you can create? What is it that you can dream up that will be compelling to somebody? And how do you make it compelling? How do you make a fantasy world that connects with the audience? Why is it that Middle Earth is so compelling? And what made it so compelling at the time? And why is it that so many people have tried to recreate Middle Earth in their own way ever since, right? What did Tolkien do to make Middle Earth seem like a real place? And I think, unfortunately, what a lot of people try to do is they think they have to approach it the same way that he did. That the only formula for success is to create fantasy worlds in the same way that Tolkien did. But who was Tolkien basing his ideas off of? How was he approaching it? Who influenced him to approach creating Middle Earth the way he created it? Well, the answer is that his influences were his life, and he was a a scholar of language, and he had lived through World War One, and so, and he was also he was very well versed in mythology, and he was very loyal to his country of England, and he loved England, and he felt compelled to create something that would serve almost as a mythology for England, the mythology that England never had. I read somewhere that he felt that the mythology of England wasn't nearly as rich and compelling as, say, Norse mythology or Greek or Roman mythology. So he took his life experiences and his scholarly work and his love of country and history, and he combined these things and created Middle-earth. He wasn't necessarily basing it off of something else that he had seen. So what does that mean? That means that the creation of Middle-earth was for him a personal experience, and that's really at the heart of what I want everyone to take from this course. We live in a very exciting time now, where the idea of world building, I think, is more exciting than ever, because there are so many outlets for world builders, and it's things like Kickstarter and the internet and social media that have given us a method for putting our ideas out there to the whole world. And that's really exciting, and we can do it ourselves. We don't have to go through a third party. We don't have to go through someone else to put our world out there for other people to see, or put our ideas out there. So to that end, I developed 6 mantras that I want everyone to remember and to write down and take to heart when we're developing our imaginary worlds. And the 6 mantras are as such. Number 1, in order to create compelling worlds, you must have a passion for your own world. Looking at the world around you, being passionate about it, being interested in more than just one thing is vitally important as a world builder and as a concept artist and as an illustrator. And we'll definitely talk a lot more about that. Number 2, don't force your world into existence. Instead, let it evolve and grow. Again, people think that what they have to do in order to create their own fantasy world is they must write this history and invent all these languages and have it be all set in stone and all work perfectly before they can even call it done. And that's just not true. You need to have a starting point, and then you need to allow your world to evolve and grow as you learn more about it yourself. As you start to live in this imaginary world, you'll start to understand it better, and therefore you can expand upon it, change it, evolve it. Number 3, world building is ultimately about psychology. And what I mean by that is that it's not about, a compelling fantasy world isn't compelling because it's accurate or because it's scientifically viable or that it's that it's tangible. It's that it taps into something that is a shared human experience. It's about capturing feelings and emotions and moods that are inspiring and compelling to other human beings. And if you put yourself into it, if you take your human experience and put it into your world building, that is going to be evident, I think, to the person that's experiencing your world. But we'll get more into that. Number 4, the world must be fun for you to build in order for it to be interesting to us. And so that's similar to the last one, but it's important as a separate mantra, because as you're creating your work, as you're developing your world, if you aren't having fun doing it, then you're not doing it right, or you become misguided, and it means that you think that your world and your personal vision has to meet some other external requirements in order for it to be commercially viable or marketable. That's the wrong approach. If Tolkien thought of it that way, we wouldn't have Middle-earth. If George Lucas had thought about Star Wars that way, we wouldn't have Star Wars. So you need to be having fun while you're doing this work, and if you're not, then that's a red flag that you need to rethink your approach. Number 5, world building should be personal and reflect your personal voice. Again, the last 3 are sort of a similar theme, but it bears repeating that you need to find a way to put your personal voice into it. What are you trying to say about this world that you're creating that's different than what someone else might say? Again, it doesn't mean you can't play with classic themes. Okay, let's say you like medieval fantasy worlds, but you also like zombies, right? Those are 2 very well-tread genres. Well, let's combine the 2. And this is an example I used in the writing assignment. What about a medieval fantasy world that has where everyone is undead? Everyone is dead or undead. That sets up an interesting and compelling idea. And so, what you might be trying to say is that, how come no one's ever done sort of a post-apocalyptic fantasy world? So, right? I mean, so you're sort of taking a lot of different genres and you're saying something new, right? There's lots of post-apocalyptic movies, but why does the apocalypse always seem to occur right after our existence, like our lifetimes, or within our lifetimes? What if the apocalypse happened during the plague of the Middle Ages? But again, a personal statement that you're trying to make. And the 6th mantra is, it's the little things that count. Don't forget about the little things. And in fact, it's the little details that you put into your world building that are what makes your world more realistic and feel like a place that actually exists. When you're walking down the street in the real world, look around you and look at all the little stories that are out there. You might pass by a doorway that has a bunch of flyers pinned up on a board, and like somebody's offering yoga classes, or they're selling an old couch. Maybe there's a slice of pizza on the sidewalk that's just somebody just dropped there. Why? Why did somebody drop a slice of pizza on the sidewalk? What's the story there? It may not be an interesting story, but it also might be an interesting story. Who knows? But all those little details means that your world is alive, and that is that's a really important part of world building. Okay. So the last thing I want to talk about is some books that you might want to pick up or read if you happen to have in your library, or borrow, that I think can be inspirational for this course. The first is a book called The Dictionary of Imaginary Places. It's basically just an encyclopedia of imaginary worlds, and includes some maps and stuff. And a description in where these imaginary worlds were featured, whether it's literature or mythology or what. So that's one book. The next book is a little book that's put out by Disney. It's called The Imagineering Way. It's just a lot of great little thoughts and mantras and personal experiences of creative employees of Disney. Whether it's in the animation world or in theme park design, but it's basically just ideas for how to generate ideas, which is really what this course is ultimately all about. So I think this is a really great book. It's fun to read through, and it's got a lot of great suggestions for how to get out of your head in order to open up your mind to receiving inspiration from lots of different sources. Because ultimately, coming up with great ideas isn't about just sitting in one place and thinking really hard. It's about opening yourself up and experiencing the world and finding ideas, combining elements, combining things that you see and experience, and by combining these seemingly different things, you suddenly have something new and unique. So that's a good book. Then we have James Gurney's Imaginative Realism, which it's just an awesome book. You have to pick it up. It's about some technical drawing and painting things that you can do as exercises, but also where to find inspiration for creating and inventing things that don't exist, and then how to depict them and paint them and in a way that's convincing. And he goes through a lot of his different methods in this book. Then there's Tom Kidd's Other Worlds, which is a lot more about painting techniques, but also just about themes and how to depict different themes for creating fantasy worlds and imaginary places, which Tom Kidd obviously is an excellent example of an artist that has created his own personal world through his art, a vision of a personal fantasy world. Then there's a couple other books I don't have examples. I don't have them here with me. One is called Imagine by Jonah Lehrer, which is just about the creative process and how it's how the mind works and under what conditions are people most creative. A lot of it, what he talks about is as it applies to the business world, but he takes examples from the art world of how successful artists are able to think and create. So I think it's actually a very interesting book. And then also kind of a fun one is called Catching the Big Fish by David Lynch, the film director, which is a lot of it is it's mostly about how he uses transcendental meditation as a way of inspiring ideas in his work, which I'm not advocating, but I'm also not saying it's not a good idea either. I haven't tried it, but it might be something that would work for you. But it's a fun book. So, and if you're familiar at all with David Lynch, you're in for a quirky experience. So I would check that book out. So let's get started with the course. I'm really looking forward to it. I want you guys to share your experiences with each other on the Facebook page and also on the blog. If there's anything, if there's one thing that I want you guys to remember the most out of this course, and this is the way I'll wrap this video up, is world building is about your personal take on the world, and as I've said several times through this, don't feel as if you should be guided by any external forces that are telling you, well, this is what will make for a successful imaginary universe or world that people will love, because those formulas are based off of stuff that has worked before. But stuff that's worked before isn't a great template for things that are going to work in the future, things that are going to be amazing and exciting in the future, because the future hasn't been made yet. And you want to shoot for creating something that will then become the standard upon which others try to create new content in the future. You don't want to just strive to be half as good as what has come before you. So try to have that approach throughout this course, and keep that in mind, and write the mantras down, print them out, put them up on your wall, keep checking yourself against them. So that's it. Have fun, and I'll be seeing you over the next 6 weeks. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.